This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1080, Book of the Month Club, Spider-Man Blue.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1080. It's a Book of the Month Club special that's coming to you on Valentine's Day as we talk about a perennial favorite of mine, Spider-Man Blue, which is the Spider-Man by Jeph, Loeb, and Tim Sale, which came out in 2002. This has always been a favorite of mine, but before I can really talk about it, I got to talk about my co-hosts. I got Paul Skorez and Nathan Struck joining me for this very special Valentine's Day episode. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hello there.
Hiya.
So before we get into the issue and the first time you read it, what you thought of it, I just want to do as I often like to do and kind of reorient ourselves with when this book originally was published. So it came out started coming out in May 2002. It's 6 issues, but it didn't end up ending until March 2003. So it had a very big delay between issues 4 and 5 and 5 and 6. But May 2002 is notable as to why they were putting out a lot of miniseries at that time, because May 2002 saw the premiere of the first Spider-Man movie on May 3rd of that year. And 2 weeks later, we had Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. So what a May. In terms of the top comics that came out in May 2002, I found this really interesting. In the top 20, there was only, 4 DC books cracked the top 20, so it was not a good time for DC. Marvel had 14 of the top 20 slots. Dreamwave had 1, and we also had Image. So if I go back, number 10 that month was G.I. Joe number 6. Number 9 was Ultimate Spider-Man Special number 1. Number 8 was the pertinent to this podcast, Spider-Man Blue number 1, launching at number 8. We had Ultimate Spider-Man 22, Uncanny X-Men 406, Ultimate X-Men 18, Amazing Spider-Man 41, Ultimates number 5, and New X-Men 126. And number 1 for the month of May 2002, Transformers Generation 1 number 2 by Dreamwave.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which, I mean, it's impressive that they held it with a number 2 issue. That's not even like the first issue. Like, that's a big one. The top song on the Billboard charts that month was Don't Let Me Get Me by Pink. And then the following month we had Vanessa Carlton's 1,000 Miles. And then a few quick things, because I'm a crazy historian and I find this stuff really interesting. Things that were happening while this series was being published. The X-Files ended its run on Fox. Monday Night Raw was finally rechristened under the WWE name. It was previously under WWF. The NBA was broadcast for the last time on NBC. Its next time being on NBC won't actually be until 2025 to 2026 season, so it hasn't even happened yet. Fox News, unfortunate, overtook CNN as the number 1 rated TV news channel. The long-running TV show Monk debuted. Kelly Clarkson won American Idol. Fox Kids aired for the final time. The Anaheim Angels won the World Series. Firefly by Joss Whedon debuted and ended while this was being published. The TV series Clone High, that I've always been a big fan of, it debuted. The Simpsons aired its 300th episode. Fred Rogers passed away. And those are the some of the main things that were happening while this book was being published. So this is Spider-Man Blue, Jeph Loeb, Tim Sale. I'm going to stop talking, finally. Paul Skorez, had you ever read this book before reading it for this podcast?
No. First time.
Had you heard of it before?
Yes, I was aware of its existence.
Were you aware that they were...
I wasn't sure if it was some, in canon story or just some kind of fun offshoot thing. I didn't know much, about it at the time. So I guess it was a book that was out there. This would have been in the heyday of me collecting a lot of comic books, but I didn't, pay any attention at the time.
And Nate, yourself?
Based on the timeline, I wasn't collecting comics. I was out of the country. So it must have been when I came back, and I have memory of reading the whole thing at once. So my best guess is you loaned me your trade, and I read it. And it probably wouldn't have been too long since I got to know you. I can't imagine anyone else who I can think of who else I would have borrowed it from before meeting you. So that's my guess, but I have definitely read this before. I don't own it. I realized I had Daredevil Yellow, which is probably my favorite color, Sale and Loeb combo. I have Hulk Gray, but I don't have this in my collection. I always meant to get it, and I don't have it. So I must have borrowed it from you.
Did you never own the oft forgotten Cap America White?
No, I have not read it or owned it. I have a vague memory of having the singles of Spider-Man Blue, but I don't have them now, so it's really kind of hazy. But I never got Cap, and I don't remember people. Yeah, like you're saying, it's not talked about, and I suppose it wasn't rated very well. It wasn't strongly recommended to my memory, but it would be nice to read it at some point. I guess I could do that on Marvel Unlimited.
Mm-hmm. I think for Cap America White, I think it missed the moment. They had done so Paul, a bit of a history lesson. So Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale did Daredevil Yellow, which was really well received, and then they moved on and did Spider-Man Blue, and then they followed it up with Hulk Gray. And they had talked about doing another book, and then I think a year or two later, they put out the first issue of Cap America White, and then it just disappeared. And I think it was, I'd have to check, it felt like a long time, but it might have been 5 or 6 years. And then they finally finished it, but by the time it kind of came out, I think it was, everyone had kind of moved on from the color books, and that the moment that they had, which was very special to a lot of people, had kind of been passed by. So I don't think that, I think that's probably why it doesn't usually get referenced or talked about. So let's go back even further. This question is for you, Paul. I mean, this is really, as much as Jeph Loeb's writing this is really about the art, I would say, more than anything. The art really is the big draw in Spider-Man Blue. What do you remember, or have you read any other Tim Sale books in the past?
Maybe, but I probably probably couldn't tell you. Like, again, this is at a time where I don't know artists and creators as I do now. Mm-hmm. As you guys have broken me more into that mold of that. So as long as I thought it looked pretty, like I didn't really care who was doing it necessarily. Mm-hmm. So it's possible, but I couldn't tell you exactly what the exposure would have been, to be honest.
And yourself, Nate?
Dark Victory, Long Halloween, these color books, those are the ones that come to mind with these two. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's another notable one that I would imagine both of you would know.
Are these color books like an initiative that these two creators put together, and I guess kind of took fire after, like, because you said that with Daredevil was the first one, Yellow, mm-hmm. and then it springboarded from there. So, like, was there like a kind of a program or a genesis behind these at all, or
not that I've ever heard of? I think the first one. Again, I don't really know what the genesis of Daredevil Yellow was. It was specifically a story about when he was still in the yellow and red costume, so at least the yellow made a bit more sense in that respect. The blue, maybe a little less so. And then we have Hulk Gray, which is, again, it's a very early story of the Hulk when he was still in his gray period. So they were doing these kind of throwback. It's interesting because nowadays we see so many of these kind of nostalgia miniseries where you have creators doing either coming back to characters or telling throwbacks to tales. You saw less of that in the early 2000s because, especially under Quesada, they were really trying to move forward as opposed to looking backwards. The big one I think that both of you would have known, or at least Nate would have known that these guys worked on together, would have been Wolverine Gambit Victims, which was a big miniseries in the mid-90s.
Never read it.
Really? I thought for sure you'd read this.
I've seen T-shirts. I've seen art for it and covers. I just never wanted to. I mean, now I want to, but I just never. Sale's rendition of both either Gambit or Wolverine, I don't think I loved. Sale obviously does extremely good work with Silver Age aesthetics, so it's possible that his Gambit just didn't speak to me, because the Jim Lee design for Gambit is crazy. Like, it is a very, like, of a moment, late 80s, early 90s moment. I don't know what it is exactly, but yeah, I aim to rectify that eventually, but no, I haven't read it.
So if we look at Tim Sale's kind of timeline, the big hits were Wolverine Gambit Victims in 95, Batman Long Halloween in 96 to 97, Superman for All Seasons, which is also on the bookshelf, which came out in 98, Dark Victory, which was 99 to 2000, and then Daredevil Yellow, Blue, Hulk Gray, etc. Now, another book he also did was 2004 to 2005 was Catwoman When in Rome, which was kind of a sequel of sorts to the Long Halloween and Dark Victory. Another big thing that a lot of people saw Tim Sale's artwork without realizing it was him. It was that in the first season of Heroes, there's a character who is an illustrator, and all the art was done by Tim Sale.
That's cool.
Jeph Loeb was heavily involved in Heroes, and that's part of why Tim Sale ended up being the artist who was involved. But so a lot of like millions of people watched that show and would actually know his art without actually knowing that it was Tim Sale at all. So that's just a quick kind of primer on Tim Sale. So Paul, I'm always curious because you're always my favorite guinea pig, because there's a lot of stuff that I've read that I relish the opportunity on the podcast to be able to put in front of you and say, you should read this. So when we were going to do something for Valentine's Day, I was like, well, I want it to be love of some kind, and I've just always loved Spider-Man Blue. I'm a big softie, as we all know. I'm curious how you felt about this, because you haven't read a lot of Silver Age Spider-Man, so this is kind of in and around a certain period, but that period isn't necessarily one that speaks to you or that you'd have a lot of knowledge of. So I'm curious how you felt going through this series and how you interacted or felt about Peter and the characters.
A loaded question. Okay, I read the John Romita kind of foreword that was in the trade here, and it's a very powerful kind of messaging from John to the team here, saying how him reading this book touched him, right? And this kind of almost gave me extra kind of incentive to go, well, that's a lot to live up to if this guy is thinking it's, quite the incredible story. And I was very pleasantly surprised how this shook out. I do like that the perspective they take on it, like they keep it very focused on the love story, love triangle, whatever you want to kind of define it as. Yes, there's still like Craven's kind of doing some shenanigans in the background, but at the end of the day, it's still very Peter focused and very on his personal life more so than the superhero life, and it really works in this story. I can't almost explain it, because usually you want the opposite. You want to see Spider-Man kick butts and take names and be the bad guy and go through his tribulations. And we've been reading a lot of Clone Saga stuff where you see him and his relationships at odds and the struggles that they're having. So to kind of see the development of love and happiness for Peter is a nice kind of breath of fresh air, I guess, in comparison. Would be the best way to put it. And I do really enjoy the art. Like, I look at some of these kind of panels. Like, there's one very early on when Peter drops the rose and he hops off the bridge. Like, it reminds me of the way I would kind of scribble Spider-Man when I was like drawing a lot of Spider-Man stuff, so Scarlet Spider stuff in high school, right? So like that type of musculature and kind of blockiness, like that's kind of not my style per se, but I mirrored a lot of stuff based on this type of art. And it's very clean. Like, there's not a lot of noise here. He does a really good job with making the characters look very classic, but modern at the same time, if that makes any sense. So it kind of is. There's a really cool scene in here when he's fighting the Goblin and he's throwing all the bats at him, reminding me of the Spider-Man movie when Toby's slipping between that. I don't know which one pulled from which, but I thought that was a really cool kind of scene that reminded me of that for the most part. And there are parts where you look at when he unmasks the Goblin, it looks very Romita-y with all the lines and scribbles and stuff like that, right? So it's kind of like he's paying tribute to a lot of different types of Spider-Man lore with the art here. So sometimes, like, you look at when you first see Gwen, like, her eyes seem really far apart. And like, so some of the girls kind of suffer from that a little bit, but it's not like a deal breaker. But yeah, overall, like, this was very enjoyable for me to go through, I must say.
I do think with Gwen, I think he gets more comfortable with drawing her. But it's interesting because it does feel very much like a Ditko Gwen who felt like, less conventionally attractive as the Romita Gwen. Because Romita is well known for he was a romance artist. And so he brought a romantic angle to the book. And as you progress through this, you definitely get to see Tim Sale, enjoying the romance of it all. Like the shot of Peter and Gwen on the motorcycle is just such a great, like, that's a splash page. That didn't need to be a splash page, and under a lot of people it wouldn't have been, but there's just something really gorgeous about it. He does exquisite backgrounds. Like, there's one shot, I think it's the 4th issue, where you're just seeing the Aunt May's house and all the details around the house. I'm like, that's a great looking house. Like, I don't know what there is about it, but the artwork and the detail on that house is incredible, and he didn't have to go that hard. Like, there's no Spider-Man here. He probably, like, this wouldn't have had a high resale value. There's no Spider-Man doing fun things, and yet it's like one of my favorite pages I always look at, because I'm just like blown away by how it really grounds you in the space. Now, one thing that is very true of Daredevil Yellow and Spider-Man Blue is that they are tinged with regret and sadness, because in the case of Daredevil Yellow, Karen Page had just died. Daredevil's looking backwards at it, and he's writing a letter to Karen, and he's missing her. And this is a similar mechanism and device here, where Peter is, recording something and he's talking to Gwen. By Hulk, it begins to be a little much, because they're kind of going back to that well a lot, I feel. But here it still feels fresh enough, and it feels very much in Peter's authentic voice, and I think that's why it works. The ending is always an interesting one to me, because there's a lot of personal stuff he's talking about, and like his wife's in the house. Like, it's interesting nowadays. I mean, they're not married anymore. They've taken the marriage away, and it's interesting that to have this taken place when he was happily married, but still able to connect with the sadness that he still had. And I would just always liked how she comes in and acts, because that's not the MJ, even in the Clone Saga, that's not that MJ. We see a very different MJ who's really, I don't know, they've transformed her a little bit more into a nagging wife, whereas here she's so much more supportive. And when she's like, tell Gwen I say hi, like, that's a really sweet moment that I always really liked, that really made this land for me. Anyways, I'll stop talking for a second. Nate, I have not let you talk very much. I'm curious, first of all, do you recall what you thought of this when I first, we think, pushed this into your hands? And how do you feel now, and how has it changed for you, or does it hit differently now that you're an older guy? We're not as young as we used to be.
Older guy is perfectly fine to say it. I remember really enjoying the colors and the arts. I forgot at how much I enjoy the inks. Sale gives the inker a lot to do, and there's a lot of really good use of negative space and of there's actually a term for it, I can't quite recall, graphic weight in the inking, which I really enjoy. And normally I play the game where I'm like, oh, who do I think inspired whom? And obviously there's some Romita inspiration here, and you can see some Ditko inspiration here. And then there's other artists that I guess I just don't really know, because Sale is drawing either before or at the same time of some of the guys that come to my mind. Like Mark Buckingham, I feel there's a lot of little bits, even that house shot in that splash in issue 4, but you look carefully, especially at the foliage and around the edges of that house, and I see Bacalo, who again is, I think he's a little more junior to Sale, and I'm not saying that he was inspired by Sale or Sale inspired him, but there's just kind of like elements I pick up, and then sometimes with like the inks and the heavy borders and the very simplified faces, Marcos Martin, right? Or sometimes there's like a little bit of Stuart Immonen almost coming through in the simplicity. And so there's just a lot of maybe a little bit of even Pablo Rivera coming in from time to time. And it is interesting, particularly like Paul was saying with the Spider-Man, even like his build, there's a lot of very Romita-esque kind of chunky Peter Spider-Mans. And then all of a sudden he'll inexplicably switch to something more lithe and more sinister is not the right word, I suppose, but certainly a little more eerie with the Ditko kind of style. So the art is beautiful. It is absolutely worth the price of admittance, especially if the price of admittance was that you have a subscription on Marvel Unlimited. But the colors and the inks are enough. And then the story, a little bit hokey at times. I mean, the characterization not always landing. I figure you have a lot to say about this, Adam, particularly when it comes to Gwen, that they're doing different things with her than you would read her as in the era. She's very tongue in cheek. She's very almost ethereal or over flirtatious. She's kind of squinting around a lot, looking very knowingly. And then they do the whole Archie comics thing, right? And then it's Veronica and it's
Betty.
The other one's name? Betty, there you go. The blonde one. And they're bringing him soup and going to read to him and fighting over him. And even Flash is like, I don't understand this. This doesn't feel like this is earned in not so many words. And as the reader, you just kind of have to go along with it. Peter's charming and he's cute. But yeah, the fact that both these women are throwing themselves at him, I guess you have to go with it. But overall, the sentiment feels meaningful. And as an older guy, yeah, I guess... what you're saying too is right, Adam, like looking back, like with his wife, maybe not wife in the house, finding her best way to be supportive, listening in, and also feeling that sadness and loss of Gwen really is the stuff that I like the most. I don't really care about the Craven storyline very much. It's a fun kind of like Hush style thing for, hey, I have an artist that I really love and my artist wants to draw what they want to draw and they would love to draw a classic Rogues Gallery. So let's let him draw a member of the Rogues Gallery every issue, and we'll just kind of cycle through them. Yeah. So I guess my answer is I enjoyed it both times. I'm enjoying it a little bit differently this time, and I haven't quite put my finger on exactly why.
I just want to point out, I just did double check because I thought so. So Tim Sale did ink this as well. So he did everything but the colors there. Although, interesting little tidbit, he's actually colorblind, which I remember finding out about when he was doing Heroes, because they were talking about some of the color palettes he used in Heroes, and he was like, "Oh, I'm colorblind." And I'm like, "Oh shit!" I apparently he's a lot more colorblind than I am. So, but yeah, that's just a little fun tidbit there for Tim Sale enthusiasts. I agree in general that rereading it, I enjoy the superhero parts, but it is the Peter parts that I enjoyed the most, because it's got. You're right about the hokiness at times, or the kind of the corniness, but I think that's what works for me there, because it feels like a Silver Age book, but with a modern sensibility, and it's not afraid to just kind of have fun. And I've said this many times before, both with you guys and on the podcast in general, but I think as I get older, I appreciate fun and whimsy in my comics even more. And so I feel like I lived through so much Sturm und Drang with comics that I don't need that anymore. And I just like comics that can just have fun and have bright colors and aren't ashamed of it. And I feel like this book really gave me that. It's interesting about Gwen, the kind of squinty eye kind of look, and her being a little bit more caustic than maybe the Stanley Romita version is more true to when she first appeared under Ditko. And she definitely it was not as quite as soft an edge, and then they softened it up once Romita came on. So it's kind of an interesting hodgepodge of highlighting both elements of her personality because of the two different artists who are so important to her evolution as a character. Overall, I mean, I still like her here. She's still very enjoyable to read. I like how when they show them fighting over Peter, they do it in a way to accentuate obviously what makes them different, and like Gwen is doing something that's very thoughtful, and like your uncle used to read something to you, and I found out about this, and I'm going to do this thing. So it's a much more of an emotional hit, which is trying to show that she gets him in a way that Mary Jane can't at this point. Although even the book makes the point of saying like because of Gwen's death, it allowed MJ the growth to move forward and become a different person, and so that's always been talked about. I don't know if it's usually been said so explicitly in the comics themselves, and so Peter like himself kind of mentions that like I think this was the turning point for MJ, and which I think everyone agrees on, which is nice that they kind of added it as well. I think it still worked for me in general. I was blown away more by Tim Sale's art now than I think even the last many times I've read it. Like that for the establishing shot when we first see MJ, obviously it's a different outfit. It's not the same. It's not an exact recreation of what John Romita did. But that first shot of MJ is just like jaw-dropping. Like she just looks fantastic. And so he really knows. I think Tim Sale's more comfortable with the beauty of MJ because it's more obvious. And I think he at times, not struggles, that's the wrong word, but it takes him a little bit of time to get more used to where Gwen kind of fits there. I think when he does the shot of Gwen kind of dancing, which is definitely a Ramita thing, and we saw a lot of Ramita doing that, I think that's the most comfortable Tim Sale seems to be in drawing Gwen herself in terms of being kind of a full profile. When she has her first kiss with Peter, I was like that moment, although you don't really get to see her as much. It's like her back. But it's definitely a moment that I liked and that felt earned in the process of the story. And you can kind of see why, retroactively, they're trying to make it make sense that why Peter picked Gwen. Because we all know he ends up with MJ. So why would he pick Gwen to begin with? And why would Gwen pick him? And I still like that.
Yeah.
But it's still sad. It's a melancholy story. It's like you're happy that he's, gets the girl, but we all know that the girl dies. Like there's that moment in the first couple pages when he talks about how, he thought he would spend the rest of his life with her, but not realizing that she would spend the rest of her life with him. And that's, wording has always stuck out to me and always been quite an extra sadness on the Peter Gwen story. So it's an interesting story overall. And again, the idea that it's, my funny Valentine and it's a sad twinge of a story. It's very interesting that that Jeph Loeb married it to Valentine's Day and kind of gave it a different meaning, as opposed to Daredevil of Yellow, which really had no connection with any specific time of year or anything. It was more of, I'm grieving, I'm going to write a letter to this person who has just recently passed, which is, again, something that marks it differently from Spider-Man Blue, where he's talking about someone who has died a long time ago.
I wonder if people, I think I might be included in this category as well. Like, I knew MJ from my time reading comics starting from, like, some late 80s stuff and then mostly into the 90s. And this is quite a reminder about who she was at the time and how, like you said, that splash of Gwen hugging Peter at the end of issue 1 on the motorcycle, the great little banter between the two of them. Is it fast? Not too fast. I like it fast. And then she's pressing herself against his back and smiling, holding around his waist, and he seems quite happy. And then when MJ gets on the bike, it's, can't this thing go any faster? She doesn't get Peter. She's not really as... doesn't gel with him in the same way. Gwen is in the lab doing experiments. Gwen brings a book to read. Gwen did the work to kind of go like, well, I know that your uncle read this to you and you have that deep abiding connection to it. Mary Jane brings him her aunt's soup. I didn't research what Peter's favorite soup is. I didn't bring the soup necessarily for Peter. I brought it because my aunt, and she even says, like, you must think it's awful that I didn't make it. Like, even kind of saying, hey, I'm not really good at, this isn't even mine. And then there's also some kind of like gendered stereotypes there too about like women should be able to cook or whatever. But like for Mary Jane, she's a party girl. She didn't make the soup. She got her aunt to make it for her. She's going to come and nurse him, but Gwen gets him intellectually. Gwen gets, and it's interesting too because Mary Jane has the better connection to the family because she has it in right there. And yet Gwen's like, no, I know this is from your childhood. And for Mary Jane, it's a criticism. Can't this go any faster? I want faster. And she's doing a lot of this, like, very, like the attachment styles, right? Like, anxious attached and avoidant attached. Mary Jane's doing a lot of, like, the avoidant attached stuff, where she's just, like, getting really close to him way too soon without him even, like, being into it, calling her, like, my guy, and little kisses, and, oh, your bruises, and I'm going to nurse you. And they've just met, whereas, like, Peter and MJ, they go to school together, they know each other a little bit more. And you're right that the story is doing a pretty good job of kind of going like Mary Jane is not a good long-term commitment kind of girl. So this would be a reminder for people who in the 2000s and the 90s before that were just familiar with a certain kind of MJ. But it is interesting that essentially she gets fridged for MJ according to this retcon, right? Like that it wasn't just the need of the publisher to try to get Peter with another girl and then fast track them to marriage and change MJ's personality that way in this very, it doesn't serve the story what happened with MJ's character. This is trying to kind of retcon that back and going like, no, there's a diegetic reason why, and she was kind of traumatized by the death of Gwen, and this is kind of what made her grow up. But I guess, this is like a fridging of Gwen for MJ storyline at the end. I guess so. I mean, I would say a lot of it's in the original text. Like when you read the Jerry Conway stuff, like he has Peter move on fairly quickly and does have MJ start to feel different. So like even when we were reading the original Clone Saga, like the MJ there
is not the party girl already, and that's already in the 70s. Like, it's happening now. They then write her out of the book, and she's gone for like a long time, so people kind of forgot about MJ, which is hard to imagine now, because everyone's like crazy people. Spider fandom is a little bit insane about wanting the marriage back to an insane degree. I'm fine, whatever. Comics are comics. Things are going to change. It's just the way it is. Like, how long was was Scott Summers with Emma Frost? Like, a long time. But there's a whole generation of people who started reading comics and who don't understand why he's with Jean. And they're just like, no, he's with Emma. That's the way it's supposed to be. I'm like, no, but also yes. You know, it's very interesting how that works. One thing I wanted to, well, not one thing, but one thing that did stand out to me that I really liked about how Tim Sale does certain characters is that by now he had already done the Joker in Long Halloween. And so when you see the Green Goblin, it feels very much like his Joker in a lot of ways. And in terms of how he contorts the Green Goblin's face, in the first 2 pages when you see Green Goblin, you have that crazy tight shot on the full page that he just looks absolutely bananas. And in the next page, you have him kind of hovering above the ground and above Peter, but behind him, like, you have like a mad scientist like lab. And I like that they kind of emphasize that, because I think we forget that Norman Osborn, you know, does a lot of stuff with chemicals and can create things, and he isn't just a businessman. Like, he developed the formula, well, him and Strum, but he developed the formula. He came up with the gas that erases Spider-Man's spider sense. That's how we found out who he was, the first time. So there's a lot of stuff that happens that we forget that he's a mad scientist. So I like that behind him we see like beakers and stuff, and we get this idea that there's more going on. And he's a mad scientist. So I like the little details there. I don't know if Jeph Loeb asked for them, but there's definitely he is something of a scientist himself.
That meme, really, I mean, maybe people in this time period forgot about that, but that meme, right, from the Spider-Man movie, being something of a scientist myself, I don't think anyone can be allowed to forget that now, right? Not
now, but you're right. At the time
Yeah.
when this came out,
Yeah.
and there's a shot when the pumpkin bomb blows up and the Green Goblin is kind of thrown clear. It's such a weird, grotesque shot, but really fascinating, where, like, I don't even know how to describe what the Green Goblin looks like, but he's like being blasted away.
Yeah.
But it's a very unnatural posing of the character, and his limbs
Very cartoony.
look
Yeah.
extra long, and again the shadow of the goblin face is really interesting. Like, he does so many.
Wile E. Coyote getting blown up and shot aside, right?
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? Absolutely, that's a really good call. In general, I think he does a great Jameson too. Like, I think in general, I think he does a lot of good character faces. And he makes
Craven is a little rough.
You think Craven's a little rough?
Yeah, his head is this weird shape, and the mustache is like bleeding off his face. It's kind of that's
Very exaggerated. Yeah, a
Yeah.
lot of them are very exaggerated.
Like, everyone else I can kind of work with, but when Craven, because when you see him in lurking in the shadows, right? All you see is like his eyes, but the face looks very like I can picture what he looks like outside of the shadows. Right? I have this kind of visual of him. So when he finally comes into the light, it's like, oh, that's not pretty, you know. There's even a really cool shot. I don't even know, like, as I was kind of scanning through, when he's fighting the Rhino, there's this one, like, in the top left panel, like, he's hiding up there, almost like an Easter egg. He's not, like, very obvious. I know he's in the shadows, you know, pre and post some of the fights, but in the middle of the one fight, he's kind of there. Like, you wouldn't have caught him if you weren't. He blends in with the background very nicely there. Yeah, so I really appreciate it. Oh, I see something's percolating up there with this guy up in the shadows. I did appreciate that shot, and I do really like how the book even started, like him going up on the bridge on Valentine's Day, making this his regular cadence, and seeing the rose get put up, and then seeing the rose fall as it kind of speaks to the way, like, she died and stuff like that. I thought that was a very powerful kind of great way to put that scene together. And that alone, like, okay, this drew me in, like way to start a story with imagery like that.
Yep.
There is, I forget which issue it is now, but that moment where Spider-Man saves Flash Thompson, and it's like a recreation of Amazing Spider-Man 15.
Yeah,
that's a fun little moment, because it's interesting there because that's a Kirby cover. So it's interesting, like, you have a guy who's been channeling Ditko and Romita, and now he's doing that version of a Jack Kirby cover at the same time. I thought it was a really interesting meld. In general, the whole fight in the snow against the two vultures I thought was just gorgeous. Like, just something about the snow effect looked really nice, and I just liked how he was able to find a way to make the vultures look different enough, even though they're both essentially wearing the exact same costume, but they felt different enough in terms of their musculature, their overall body language, that I thought it was a really interesting and engaging fight to watch.
I also am reminded of the back and forth with MJ and Gwen, especially when Gwen just starts needling MJ. And she's like, just happened to be in the neighborhood, did you? Says MJ. And Gwen goes, actually, Harry has 2 theater tickets for that new Broadway show. MJ, I hear it's awful. Gwen, well, you'd know. How is your acting career going, MJ? And he goes, girls, like, what a kind of caustic back and forth. What a, spitting venom at each other. And I'm not used to Gwen, seeing panels where Gwen talks that way. Just, you're a crappy actor, MJ. Your career sucks. You would know a bad play if you saw one. It's like right to the throat. That's is that something that you've read her sound like or act like in other comics?
Again, like in her first couple appearances, the thoughts that she had were definitely more in line with something like this. But I think in general, a lot of people are like, oh, Gwen's too bland. Gwen's too vanilla. She doesn't have much personality. She's just kind of like almost like a yes girl. Like, she's just kind of there to like cause a little bit of drama, but not too much drama, and then just be this goody good girl. And so I liked giving her a little bit more depth and showing no, she likes Peter, and like MJ just kind of likes everybody and is just kind of latching onto things. And so Gwen's been like, no, I like this guy. Like, get out of here. And so I actually kind of appreciated that.
Yeah, MJ likes to be liked, right? And that goes back to the line like, oh, Mary Jane Watson, anything goes, right? Mm-hmm. Gwen has a certain thing she likes. She likes speed. Mary Jane, anything goes. She is really just about almost this kind of like wound, right? Like later on, they'll bring in things. Other writers will talk about her father issues and like emotional neglect and abuse, and how she's kind of just trying to get any affection, anyone to look at her and acknowledge her at all. But yeah, this comic does a pretty good job of going like, MJ's a whirling dervish, and she's not going to be there for you. She's just trying to get people's attention. But Gwen seems to know what she wants, which is fair.
I do like also when the girls leave, she said, Gwen says, sure, Peter, and MJ again doesn't just call him Peter in most of these places. Like, oh, sure, later, PDO. Like, everything is about putting on airs, right? Like, everything's fine. She's not worried about things. Although it's interesting when Flash tries to hit on her and she's like, Earth the Flash drop dead. Like, that's a little extra harsh, even for Party Girl MJ, but it was interesting.
Yeah.
One thing I question for you, Paul. So obviously, Flash Thompson becomes Agent Venom. He has a military background. So this is basically how, in and around this period is when he joined the military and went to Vietnam. Did you see that coming? Did you have any thoughts about like how they kind of portrayed Flash coming to this decision?
I realized it happened now. Like, it makes sense, right? Like, him being this, cocky, like, he comes to realize with himself. He was saying, like, in high school, he was, the pro star, everyone loved him, and now he's losing out to Puny Parker. So it's kind of a reality check for him. And then, yeah, I think the MJ kind of, beg you loser, was a reality check saying, yeah, maybe I do have to do something more with myself than being this dumb jock. And it helps him evolve his character arc and process. So, yeah, like even for me, only knowing what I know for certain eras of Spider-Man, like through certain comics I've read and various animated series and this and that, like, I maybe never always put together the fact that there was a relationship, small friendship that happened with MJ and Gwen before she passed away. I always thought it was Peter and Gwen. Gwen eventually passes, and then along comes MJ afterwards, separately from all of it, to become the new love interest. I didn't realize there was an overlap of any time that happened. So this, in fact, tells me otherwise. So that was always kind of, because usually, like, they don't do both in most medium outside of obviously the main book, right? So that's kind of was always my assumption that MJ came after Gwen's death, but there was never any overlap.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I've always taken it for granted, but that's an interesting perspective to take. So this would reframe a lot of that because, they they were around at the same time. MJ actually dated Harry while Peter was with was with Gwen, and when they broke up, that's part of what actually drove Harry to drugs the first time, which eventually would lead to him having a relapse, and then that being part of what the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of Norman Osborn becoming the Green Goblin and killing Gwen. So there's a lot kind of tied up in that. So it's interesting that this was kind of new information for you. A really funny detail as I'm kind of flipping through the book that I just noticed now is that in the last issue, when Craven is reviewing, all the different films of Spider-Man beating the Rhino and the Lizard, etc., after he's watched them all, for no reason, he just kicks his projector off wherever it was. I'm just what a weird detail. He's just so angry. I'm just gonna knock this film projector on the floor, and I'm like, okay, that's a really bizarre detail, but all right. Yeah, Nate showing Paul that, but yeah.
Villains don't care. Villains don't care about property damage. Okay? They just smash them.
I did a couple more stray thoughts. First of all, Harry Osborn's apartment is gigantic,
a loft.
Yeah, it's something. I think Harry's a really interesting one in terms of how they portray him, because they really make him look kind of extra skinny and sniveling at times, because obviously we see Norman, he's obviously a better built guy, but it's interesting how much they really lean on Harry kind of being an uncomfortable weirdo. He doesn't really fit anything except for he's got money and he's kind of the conduit for everyone else. But it's interesting that I feel like Loeb writes him really not really having a lot of social graces either, and Tim Sale definitely kind of accentuates that with some of his art.
It's that Jughead nose that he gives him too, right? It's very Jugheadish in this Archie group.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, yeah. Now, any other kind of thoughts about Aunt May is used very sparingly here. She does show up. I mean, again, I'm really blown away by the choices that Tim Sale makes in terms of some of these double-page splashes, because you have a double-page splash, which is literally Aunt May picking up a teapot and Peter eating cornflakes. That's a double-page splash, and it works, and you can feel the gulf of the moment, and you can feel a lot in there. And it's really well illustrated because you can feel everything there. There's also that other shot where Spider-Man's hanging upside down at a newsstand, and the level of detail is unnecessary, but Tim Sale really goes for it. So it's really interesting to see. So I'm curious if there were any other particular shots that really kind of took you guys either by surprise or really you had to note that, oh wow, what's going on here?
I wanted to add on to the the Aunt May arts, which, that whole sequence, just the way that he depicts her, the way he draws her in every panel, there's so much love and care given to her the size of her body relative to her head. She has a very thin, kind of frail body with very small little ankles, and she's very slight, a lot of character in her face, a lot of concern. Just drawn super well. So that, the beginning of issue 4, that discussion, that conversation, and the use of the nice white kind of kitchen cabinets to frame everything with the white in her hair is super cool. I also agree that
1,000 years old. Oh my God, this poor woman! Holy crap!
Again, very very Ditko, right? This ancient woman.
She's about to die.
Also agree, at any given time. In issue 2, this scene with the newspaper guy, newsstand, it gives almost like Golden Age, some of the Golden Age comics, the Yellow Kid had tons and tons of extraneous detail just to give the character or build the character of New York, which I always appreciate. I think that some of the best, most enjoyable New York centered comics will have artists that really know their source material or have taken photographs or whatever, really drawing out New York. And then the only other part that really came to mind was, it must have been issue 1, right, where the firefighters come in and they stop the fire, and Norman is declared to be saved and the Green Goblin is dead. Same issue where Paul has already pointed out that fantastic drop rose in the water, and I just really love this shot of Peter bringing Norman out of the burning building. In the foreground is an arm from a firefighter. You can see, the perspective all the way down to the truck alongside the building. It just gives such a great feel and sense of place and depth. And again, these heavy shadows in the light of the licking flames that I thought was quite arresting for me. The
newsstand moment, that must be the angriest looking guy behind the like who's selling newspapers. Like he looks super like old and angry. Like that guy's that guy has seen shit.
He doesn't even want your money. He just wants to yell at you.
So this is the guy who would rob the newsstand, not own the newsstand. Like it's.
That's right.
I also like even the page before, like the Bugle, the whole like front page is upside down. Like you're reading it like Spice upside down, so the whole page is upside down. I thought that was a cool kind of flex as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So when Peter is doing that, when he listeners, do your best to imagine this. So when he's hanging upside down like that, and then he's got a paper, and then he has a single thread of webbing, and from our perspective, we just see his back. And then we don't see what the webbing is either connected to. It's either connected to his chest, which is not really his style because then it would tear his costume. It looks like he is so strong, which of course he is, that he's using his toes to just pinch that line of webbing. Is that what he's doing in your head canon?
I mean, yes, but I guess, it's interesting.
Incredible.
Once you take a moment to draw a bead on it, I think in my mind, I'm like, well, it's got to be a pretty thick strand of webbing, but you're right, that's not a thick strand of webbing at all. So really, I don't know if it makes any sense.
Well, spiders can, with their legs, just grip onto their own webbing and hang. So, I mean, he's doing the best he can with the anatomy of a human being and, the sci-fi-ness of the spider powers. But
he has grippy feet, he says grippy fingers, doesn't he?
Yeah.
That's all there.
I'm just saying, though, that's strength. I mean, bro's got incredible legs. Not just a puncher, right? His leg strength is just as good as his arm strength. So that's goals, man. I want to get that strong in my legs.
There you go. Like, even the next page, too, you flip to the university, you have the cool, like, Gwen's looking through the beaker, and her eye is, exaggerated there, and like the periodic table, and the panel below, and the skeleton, like, everything is so, like, it's not just lazy backgrounds, as sometimes you get in books. You're in the Bugle, and you see nonsense happening in the background. We're talking to Jonah. Like, there's a lot of... no wonder the book so long to do, because there's so much TLC, and a lot of these panels. Like Connor's lab is super impressive. Like there's a lot of stuff put into this to really make it a world that's lived in, I guess, is what you want, right?
I would say
I love all the lighting too. I love the way that the light shines through the windows. It shows in the establishing shot of the university what the windows look like, and then it gives you the window, like the light shining through and the shadows of the frames. And then again onto the next panel, it's still. And then at nighttime later on, when it's not nighttime really, but like in Peter's head, things have become blue. There's still cast shadows against the wall from the windows. Like absolutely, there's dimensionality to it, and a sense of place throughout, which is just not done all the time. And it draws your attention how good it is.
Yeah, no, he definitely. Well, a big thing that really stood out to me, I should say, is he's very deliberate on wardrobe. Like, the wardrobe is very particular. He kind of dresses each character very fittingly. Like, it's not just generic clothes. It feels very specifically chosen. And at times it's what Peter would have been wearing, back in the original comics, but not always. And so he's just... Even in the establishing shot of MJ, which, again, he doesn't go with the original outfit, he goes with something different, but he goes with something that feels very period, but also very MJ at the same time. Like, you don't look at the outfit and go, well, that doesn't look right. No, that looks exactly right. When you see them hanging out at, I guess it's the Coffee Bean, MJ's wearing a very, period-specific outfit, but it feels very accurate as well. Like, it feels like he had a lot of clothing samples and really kind of wanted to decide how he was going to outfit these characters. That a lot of thought was gone into it. Like, even with Aunt May, as we were talking about before, like, the way, like, she's got like a sweater on, but then she's got like a cardigan on top, but it's not on her arms. Like, that's a very specific choice. That's not something you do by accident. Even Peter in that sequence where, I don't know if Jeph Loeb would have told him to do this, but, he has the tie slung over so he doesn't get in his cereal. He gets the milk mustache. Like, those are little details that really humanize the moment and, again, make you forget that you're just reading a comic book, because it feels very lived in, as you kind of said before. One thing I want to bring up, because we're talking a lot about the art, is from a stylistic device, I'm curious how you felt about the tape recorder, because the tape recorder is almost like another character here, because you'll have moments where Peter will stop talking for a moment, and you're not hearing it, obviously, because you're reading it, but you'll read the whir of the tape recorder, which adds an element to the silence, that every time he's not talking, it's still recording, and so time is actually still taking place, even though he's not talking to us or we're not seeing his words. Whereas every other time, it's him having a constant stream. So I like how the tape recorder adds an extra dimension. I'm curious if you guys picked up on that, how you felt about the tape recorder, or if you just thought it was a superfluous element.
I thought it was a cool idea because I think his struggle with a tape recorder, having it work, having it not work, whatever, kind of goes along with the struggle of him telling the story, right? So, like, this is something that's very deep for him. Like, clearly, he says restless nights with this in his brain, so he felt it appropriate to kind of just talk to someone about it, right? And vent out his feelings and tell the story and put it out there. So I think it's a very appropriate kind of mechanism for him to kind of use and go through it. With my AV background, I appreciate it. So yeah, I thought it worked really well in the context of the story, actually.
For me, it's an interesting diegetic choice to take something that in this era wouldn't have been odd or out of place in the time the story is set. But Loeb still makes a point of saying, I found one of Uncle Ben's old tape players. So even in the context of a story ostensibly set in the 60s, this is older than that. Kind of lets us know, if this is taking place in modern time, and also this was only 5 years ago for Peter, therefore not making it the 60s, he's kind of excusing why he's not using what would be maybe even in our time period a phone. He's giving us that kind of allowance. But also at the same time, those of us who know tape players know the eerie, odd, inhuman sound of the like those sounds are, I don't know, they're definitely very unearthly. They're very odd. They're almost alien. So it's in terms of the shifting tone, it is a bit kind of an odd, this is a romantic tale about my funny Valentine and this girl, and then click, is it used for comedy? It's very kind of this abrupt thing that you almost forget about the recording, and it kind of snaps you, it rips you from this past, this navel gazing, this nostalgia into a present. Which he does, he really just does it. Loeb just does it at the beginning of each issue and the end of each issue to kind of tie things together to remind you what this is.
Each issue is almost a tape, right? Because you see a stack of tapes kind of at the end there, right? So each issue is kind of like, oh, I'm out of, tape. I got to start the next one.
Well, I had a question about that because,
yeah, that's fun.
That's the most obvious interpretation of that because obviously we're in the 6th issue. We see that there's already a stack of 5. So in theory, he's working on the 6th. But is it also possible that, this isn't the only time he's done this? He often records letters to her, and maybe this is, this is the 6th letter. There's been that many others, and he's talked about other parts of their relationship. Obviously, the most obvious solution is that, no, this is just from today's session. But maybe it's not. Maybe this is something he has done on occasion. This just happens to be the Valentine's time he did it. Maybe there was another time he did it as well. Who knows, right? But I'm just curious, and I wonder if this is the first time MJ's caught him doing this.
Well, that's deep meta text right there.
I would imagine just the way that he sets it up and the way it sounds like he's starting this journey of and if MJ keeps doing this to him, that's also kind of extra. It goes beyond just she overheard him. She heard him talking in the attic. She went to go see if he was okay, and she stumbled on this. If this is her thing that she does, and she waits in the shadows, I feel like that is a very different takeaway. I guess you can pick your own version of what you think here, but I definitely like Paul's suggestion that there is a tape in the player, and Sale has listed out the other 5. Absolutely seems to be reflective of the 5 issues. But how small are these tapes? Because how much tape you can record. You know how much you can say on these tapes. So maybe these are the smaller kind. They seem to end a little bit quickly.
True. I know. Question for you, Paul. As I often am always curious when I have you read one of these things. Does this make you either one want to read the other color books, or does it make you want to read any of the original material that was around this period that would have been, with these characters and experiencing what the 60s were like, that this is kind of channeling?
I think it would open the door to more of the color books for sure, because if they're of similar quality, whether it's Art of a Story, that would intrigue me for sure. Going back to reading really old 60s comics, I know we had that taste with the original Clone Saga to a certain extent, so that kind of it does have a different feel to it overall. But I've been trying to read a bit more different things, but I'd probably go color books first, and then maybe consider, some of that Gwen MJ overlap period to kind of understand more of that history. But obviously, we know why Gwen eventually, falls in love with Peter, because she finally catches him with his tarps off. And when you see, full muscle man Peter going on there, because you think about it, like, Peter's always well covered, right? How can he's supposed to be this VB dude, not this completely jacked superhero that we know what he is when he's in Spider-Man costume. We've seen all the various exaggerated things, so.
That's a very sexy scene, right? With Gwen in her dress, and then taking off her shawl or her coat, and then Peter there, half dressed, and she walks over to him, and that's a very moment of vulnerability, and in a way that Peter seems to be very happy about.
I think
because Peter's in full long sleeves everywhere else, and where he goes.
That's right.
Interesting.
It's interesting. Again, I like that this series allowed us to see a different side of Gwen, because I do get tired of, she doesn't always have to be this kind of saintly person, and unfortunately for many years that's kind of how she was always painted. And she wasn't always like that in the comics, but she wasn't always given a lot of dimension because she was a female supporting cast member in the 60s. Like, unfortunately, there was only so much they were ever going to let her do or develop, and MJ got to really come of age, so to speak, in the 70s, when suddenly writers were more interested in fleshing out other characters that weren't just the male protagonist. That being said, it really wasn't until Tom DeFalco came on that MJ really started becoming the MJ, or at least closer to the MJ that we know today, and started giving her multiple layers and really bringing her forward. So I'm always curious, like, what if they had just written Gwen out of the book and then brought her back at some point, as opposed to killing her off? Was this the only solution? I guess at the time that's what they felt like it was the only way to do it. They couldn't just break them up with the character. They had to kill her. It's interesting how severe Marvel is when they want to keep Peter single. They'll kill off the love interest. They'll give away his marriage to the devil. Like, they'll do all these things instead of just letting the character break up with someone, get divorced. Things happen, but they won't let the character do that because they're like, well, that ages it up too much.
That's right. That's what Joe Quesada said. Yeah.
Which is, it's interesting. Like, people get divorced. People get married too young and they get divorced, and it happens. Why couldn't that happen? Why can they just not let Peter experience those types of things? I don't need Peter to be married to MJ forever, but I think taking away the marriage through such an artificial means is what feels weird. Yeah.
I think there are perspectives, too, that will shift generationally, right? Like, there's a very big difference between, like, the greatest generation's viewpoint on this and then baby boomers and then Gen Xers, who ultimately Gen Xers right now are the ones in charge of, like, they hold the keys to the kingdom. They're the higher-ups in editorial. And then once millennials and maybe even Gen Z, editorial becomes more and more and more predominant or have some greater hegemonic power in Marvel, that might slide. And also with the appetites of the audience. But I think what also helps that is the fact that there is a Gwen, Spider-Gwen, or a Ghost Spider, that there is a Miles Morales, that we have these teenage characters to be the young ones, and then Peter, and there's different Peters, right? Again, like Across the Spider-Verse, Into the Spider-Verse, the Peter who is a divorced dad, right? Like, with a dad bod, is as a shepherd, as the uncle shepherding the younger generation, is, for some people, has become... Oh yeah, okay, that's fine. That is a Spider-Man. That is an acceptable Spider-Man. The aging Tobey Maguire in No Way Home, he was Spider-Man so many years ago, and there are kids now who are late teens who weren't old enough to have seen those movies. That's how old they are to them. So an old Peter Parker, I think, is becoming a little bit more palatable for people. So we might see that at one point.
I hope so.
Well, you can see the success of what Hickman's doing with the Ultimate Spider-Man, right? Here's with MJ, 2 kids, has a beard, he's a grown-ass man. Like, it's kind of an interesting perspective, and everyone's eating that up. So
I love how the bearded boy of this crew of boys, of these Spider Boys, is the one who accentuates that the beard is really what makes the man. I'm like, I appreciate that. I feel so seen by you, Paul. Thank you.
I'm curious, Nate, having read this again, do you think that his work on the color books, Tim Sale in this case, is superior to his Batman work?
My first instinct is no. I guess I got to go back and read the color books. Dark Victory and Long Halloween are such seminal, important Batman books that my first instinct is no. But now I guess I got to go back and reread them. But that's my first instinct.
I think you're right, but I think I do agree. Well, first of all, we're talking about an embarrassment of riches here because they're both fantastic bodies of work in general. Sure. I think from a fan perspective, I might enjoy the color books more because they're a more colorful palette, but that has nothing to do with, that's not Batman's fault that he lives in a dark world. That's, I'm not going to penalize the artwork for that.
Or very, very dark gray.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there's something about the colorfulness of the color books that I really respond to. And again, maybe at some point we get Paul to read Daredevil Yellow, which you think is a superior color book to this one?
I do, but I mean, also the release of, at the time of recording, the next Captain America film is coming up. So if you were inclined, it's not about Sam though. So I guess, Captain America White doesn't really work for the upcoming.
No. Although it's interesting, we have Born Again coming in March. So at the end of March, when we have our next Book of the Month club, maybe it's Daredevil Yellow.
Yep. Heck yeah.
Actually, it would be interesting to give Paul two very different things. To give Paul Daredevil Yellow and Man Without Fear. And they're both early stories of Daredevil, and they're very different from each other. One is Chunky Monkey JR, very dark Frank Miller writing, and the other one is a beautiful ode to the Silver Age. You could not get two more different books. If I was really going to add another book in there, I would just throw in Battling Jack, just for fun.
Battling Jack.
Which is probably one of my favorite Daredevil stories of all time that has nothing to do with Daredevil. Because he's not even
really a Matt book, nope.
No, he's not even alive yet, right? Not until the very end?
Yeah, in the end, he's in the story because he gets hit by his dad, right?
Oh, yeah, no, he's in there. Sorry, I'm forgetting. I was thinking of something else. I was thinking of another story I read which was actually more of an origin. But yeah, no, Battling Jack is all about his dad, and it's a lot of interesting stuff. So apparently I'm going to be giving you a Daredevil syllabus, Paul.
Oh man, can we at least read that at some point? We got to read that with Paul. Battling Jack, one of the best comics ever written.
It's by Zeb Wells, by the way.
Good old Zebber.
I also want to touch on really quick because I know we're all close to time here.
Yeah.
The covers with the ladies on them are superb. They're nice and they're simple and they're somehow subtly sexy. I think they're all. There's three of them specifically. One with the two of them, the one with MJ, one with Gwen. I thought those really stand out to me as being really superb covers for this story.
They're very James Bondy, right? They're very of that kind of era of the intros to James Bond, of the women in Smoke or the women in Tar or the women in whatever.
Oh yeah, and it's interesting even there. Gwen's it's her face. It's simple. It's and then you have MJ's and it's her silhouette and it's a lot sexier. And which is obviously on purpose. And then in the fifth one, it's the interesting silhouette of the two against each other, where Gwen's outfit is what makes her stand out because she's actually wearing her green shirt there, whereas MJ, what is she wearing? Is she just is silhouette? What's happening? It's really interesting. In that first one, Norman Osborn looks a bit like a gangster. I don't know, that first cover, you have that cool silhouette of or not even silhouette, but you have the sense of the goblin mask. Really interesting takes on covers, interesting use of space. The fourth issue, which is the autumn issue, has a very autumn feeling color to it, kind of a warm orange to it, or at least what I perceive to be orange as the colorblind person here. Even the sixth issue, which I would say doesn't really have the thematic connection to anything inside, has a great shot of Peter. That's Silver Age Peter. That's a Ramita Peter. And I just enjoy, Sale's take on it. It does look like he's having a lot of fun.
Love the covers.
Anyway, okay. Well, thank you so much, both of you, for begging my indulgence here on wanting to come up with something for Valentine's Day. And I've always loved Spider-Man Blue, so I appreciate you guys talking about it. I should point out that I own it 4 ways, I guess. I have it the trade that's like 20 years old. I have the gallery edition hardcover where they've kind of dropped Spider-Man Blue as the name, and now it's just Spider-Man by Jeph Loeb and Tim Sale. I have the original singles somewhere in my basement, and I also have it in digital. So I love this. I have spoken for it with my money many times. I do not have the color omnibus because I had everything in trade at the time, so I just didn't think it was necessary. But once in a while I think about it. But thanks again for begging my indulgence and reading this. I really enjoy that.
It was fun.
You both liked it, thankfully. This isn't a situation where I gave something an 8 and you guys were coming in with hard 5s or 4s. So very happy about that. That would have broken my heart if Paul came in just shooting it off me like, no, this is terrible.
This trash? Yeah.
Would have broken my heart.
Yeah, no, it is a nice, tight, solid, good Peter story, right? It's and it's a lot like characterization story that really focuses, like I said at the beginning, about Peter, and it's a nice breath of fresh air from a lot of where Spider-Man is today, or like the Clone Saga. So, if someone just needs kind of a side issue thing to read, yeah, go give this a spin. You won't be disappointed.
Excellent. All right.
Great. Yeah.
Well, thanks again for listening to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. You can email us at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. You can rate us on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. And our upcoming episodes, we're going to have Judd Winnick coming back to talk about his newest Hilo book. And we have some other goodies. There's an author who wrote an upcoming book about Captain Marvel. So she'll be on the show soon. So some good stuff. And it sounds like we're going to do something Daredevil themed next month for the Book of the Month Club. Eventually we'll get back to the Clone Saga, I promise, Paul. But thank you for these detours as they come along. Thanks again for listening. Thanks so much for joining me, guys. And we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.